Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being at the museum today and taking a few moments out of your visit to join us for this July edition of our Living History series. These conversational programs are an extension of the museum's ongoing oral history project, and they complement this installation, Colorful Memories, which if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I hope you'll take a few minutes while you're in the gallery here and examine this extraordinary crayon art done by a class of first graders in Arizona just a couple of weeks after the assassination. It provides a unique mindset into the response of very young children, and that's really what our conversations are like, are all about right now, is looking at these early childhood memories of President Kennedy and the day of the assassination. And you're in for a real treat today. We have a special guest who came up from Austin, Texas, specifically for this program. Jane Dryden Louis is a remarkable lady, and she has a remarkable story to tell. So please join me in welcoming Jane to share her experiences.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jane, thank you for being here. We're going to start by taking a look at you from around 1963, probably the most adorable photo.
Folks.
Most adorable photo we've ever put up on the screen here. There she is.
Really bad glasses.
Jane, you were 11 years old at the time we're going to be talking about today, a sixth grader in Austin.
Correct.
Let's start, though, a little bit earlier because your family had some political ties, and as a result, you have some very early memories of the 1960 campaign. Tell us about that.
Right, that's right. Even preceding the family connection, I have to tell you that when I was 11 years old, or during a couple of years earlier during the campaign, it was a shock to me that Dwight Eisenhower hadn't always been the president and would always be the president. So when there was an election, it was a real revelation to me that there might be someone else. My grandfather, my mother's father, was the presiding judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals for the state of Texas and had been a Democratic county judge and district judge in various parts of the state. So he was very actively involved in that capacity with the Kennedy campaign.
So growing up again in the early 60s at the height of the Cold War, we were talking a little bit about, this threat of nuclear war that kind of hung over everybody at that time. And you have a kind of an interesting story, a childhood experience that you remember about that.
Yes, what I remember so clearly is the night that a bomb shelter salesperson came to my house and described to my parents and my brothers and I what it would be like, how they would dig this great big huge hole in the backyard and submerge this living unit where we might retreat and stock with food and water to survive the nuclear holocaust.
Did your parents buy a bomb shelter?
No.
Was that frightening to you as a child, that this was an inevitability or a possibility at that time?
It was weird, and it was made more real to me because the next door neighbor was married to an Air Force captain who was stationed in Puerto Rico. So when the Cuban Missile Crisis came, this man's wife, who had been my childhood babysitter, was sent home from Puerto Rico with her 2-year-old. And so I remember her watching television during the Cuban Missile Crisis with abject terror about what might befall her husband.
Right. You mentioned earlier that it came as a surprise to you as a young girl that Dwight Eisenhower wouldn't always be the president, but you developed quite an affinity for the Kennedy family. Give us a sense as a 10 and 11-year-old girl what the Kennedys meant to you.
The backdrop for this was that my children would say, a very needy and dramatic child. I was not inundated with television and constant imagery from the internet as people are these days. I read books all day, every day, and I climbed trees and tried to get the highest vista of the landscape that I could. And that I lived by fantasy. So what the Kennedys offered me was a fantasy of an incredibly beautiful family with a rich history, lots of relatives, lots of glamour, lots of intelligence. They were Catholic. I was fascinated with the Catholic Church. I wasn't raised in that manner, but I was really fascinated with the mystery and the imagery and the drama of the Catholic tradition. And so the Kennedys embodied that for me too. I was just utterly fascinated with them.
And Mrs. Kennedy, she, of course, kind of set the scene for fashion and hairstyles at the time. I imagine as a young girl, that was important to you too.
It was increasingly important as I got older. It was always really important to my mother. And my father made sure that my mother always looked really good. Mm-hmm. So I knew it had a cultural value that I was yet to really master.
And through the use of television, the Kennedys were really present there in your home. I remember you mentioned that Mrs. Kennedy, that tour of the White House was very illuminating for you.
Oh my goodness, it was just fascinating. Have any of you ever seen, it was on live television after she had done renovation and some kind of historical study about the rooms in the White House and the decor, and done a lot of refurbishing and historical preservation. And she gave this just magnificent tour, personal, intimate tour of that home for the nation to see. And nobody had ever had an experience like that of that place. And it was utterly fascinating.
Jane did an oral history with the museum about 15 years ago, and during that interview you mentioned that this was really kind of a secret love of the Kennedys, not something you shared outside of your closest friends, and right. Even your parents weren't fully aware of the kind of affection you had for the first family. Mm-hmm.
My parents didn't pay that much attention to me. Parents then didn't pay that much attention to their children. My job was to play outside and do whatever I needed to do between breakfast and dinner while they did their own business and lived their own lives. So yeah, it was a secret fantasy. It was something I shared with my best friend across the street and people that were in my closest circle of friends at elementary school.
And coming towards November of 1963, thanks to your grandfather, you were anticipating a very unique experience there in Austin. Tell us about that.
Right. As you may know, when Kennedy was finished with his speech at the Fashion Mart,
the Trade Mart,
the Trade Mart here in Dallas, he was coming to Austin. And there was going to be a parade downtown Austin, and school was being dismissed early throughout the district so that people could go to the parade if they wanted to. And I had this special in card with my grandfather, and I was planning on going to the parade with him and being able to be seated in some, primo spot because of his state official capacity. So that's how that day started. That's what I expected of the afternoon.
Were you excited?
Oh, super excited. Super excited. Everybody was excited.
And then things changed around lunchtime. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Every day that particular year, I walked home for lunch. That's not something that happens anymore either, but I just lived a couple of blocks from the elementary school, and I walked home for lunch every single day. And that particular day, the little bitty television in the kitchen was playing footage of what was happening in Dallas. And it was all, sunshine, rainbows, and roses during the time I was eating cheese and crackers and drinking a Dr. Pepper. And when I walked back to school and walked down the hall, everyone was in the cafeteria, and there was a television up on the screen, and all the teachers were crying. And this happened during the 2 blocks it took me to walk back to school. And I walked in and asked people what happened, and they said Kennedy had been shot.
What kind of an impact did that have on you?
I thought they had to be wrong. They had to be wrong. I had just seen television footage at home that they hadn't seen. Why did they have this kind of information and I hadn't found out? I was completely flummoxed.
Was school still dismissed early?
Yes, immediately.
And so you spent, like millions of other Americans, you spent that weekend absorbing all of this incessant news coverage.
Right.
What stands out in particular from all of that TV you watched that weekend?
I didn't miss anything, and I watched most of it with my grandparents. They lived in the house immediately behind the house that I grew up in, so our backyards were contiguous, and that was kind of a place of safety for me, or escape or something, but I always spent a whole lot of time there. But I just remember my grandfather lying on his bed, and I sat on the floor between these two beds and watched every second that I was able to watch with him.
The Kennedy funeral had a particular impact on you. You spoke of your affection for Mrs. Kennedy and seeing her in that tour of the White House, very different kind of iteration of the First Lady, representing the mourning of the nation during the funeral. You began to process this in a very unique way with your friends. Tell us about how you kind of role played after this.
Yeah. I, of course, had to write myself into the script. As I said, I was kind of a needy and desperate child, so I had to somehow make this my story. What I did was get my two best friends, Donna and Lorraine. I played the role of Jackie. One of them was Teddy Kennedy, one of them was Bobby Kennedy, and every time we walked in the main halls of our elementary school, we walked in funeral formation. Just the three of us down the halls, day after day after day. I have to laugh at this point because my children think I was utterly crazy.
We've talked a little bit about the psychology of the, young children in the assassination. In a way, this was a coping mechanism for you, a way of processing, correct?
Mm-hmm. It was a way to really try to connect with the experience of this mother, this young woman, who I had no way to know, but somehow wanted to be deeply connected to her experience.
You created a little altar or shrine to the Kennedys in your room?
I did.
What was part of that?
I had a little shelf, and I had a little statue of the Virgin Mary, and I had my best friend across the street was Catholic, therefore my fascination with that tradition. I had a rosary that she had given me. She brought little prayer cards home from church that were JFK's prayer cards. I started collecting every newspaper article, every magazine publication, every book that was published, and I had all these little things on my altar in my bedroom.
And you did something else too. You established a dialogue of sorts.
I did.
You wrote Mrs. Kennedy not one letter, about 24 letters, right?
More than that. I wrote her the first letter the week of the assassination, and I wrote her every single week until the end of May. So we had a very deep, albeit one-sided relationship. She knew a lot about me.
Now, why? Why would you do this? Write to her so diligently every single week. What prompted that, do you think?
The deep-seated need, I think, for me, and this is looking back on it from an adult perspective, really was a need to be deeply connected to someone that I admired. I wanted to be part of her life. I was deeply attracted to the emotional experience that at age 11 I was able to perceive was important and significant on a huge scale. And I wanted to help. I remember writing in one letter telling her that my father was a doctor, he was a surgeon, and I told her if he had been at Parkland Hospital, I was confident that he would have saved her husband. Again, I was a very naive, very young, very unsophisticated 11-year-old, but I had great confidence in my ability to have interceded in a way that would have changed the outcome, foolish as that may have been.
One of your letters survives today,
Yes.
and I have a transcript of it. Would you mind reading this letter and telling us the date of this letter?
I will. I cannot do this without laughing again, because when my children found out about this letter, I cannot begin to tell you. They started out with, "Mom, you should have been on a watch list." So this letter is dated January 18th. So you do the math. We had a deep relationship by then. And please join me when it gets to the just ridiculously hilarious parts. Know also that I was trying to be redemptive some way of the fact that this all happened in my home state. Dear Mrs. Kennedy, I know that you hate the whole state of Texas. I do too. I wish I lived in Washington, D.C., where maybe I could see you standing on your porch. I'm determined to move there as soon as I can. I would feel safer there. My greatest wish is to know you and to be exactly like you, which will be hard. My friends Lorraine Atherton and Donna Saunier and I talk, think, and live you. We try to write your name like you do, and then I do my attempt to copy her signature, or however you do it. We play a game in school. Lorraine is Bobby K, Donna is Kennedy K, and I am you. Teddy, Donna, pulls out the chair to my desk, takes my jacket off for me, and opens the door for me. It's fun to be you. They say I look like you too, although I am blonde and wear glasses and don't look anything like her. I love you more than anyone, and I have an urge all the time to go to Washington to maybe see you. I love you an awful lot. I get every magazine and newspaper clipping or picture about or of you. I heard your speech twice on television. I think you're the bravest woman that has ever lived. I think that the Kennedys might be distant cousins of mine. One, because my grandmother told me they are. Two, because my grandmother's great-grandparents came from Ireland and were named Kennedy. Three, because I still have cousins all over the place named Kennedy. Four, and they look like Kennedy men. I think I'm going to the World's Fair this summer, and we might get to drive through Washington. I have cousins there. If we do, I might get to see your house. I know you couldn't care less about me, but I love you more than anything I do. Don't you understand? And this is all caps. I love you, please. Believe me. If you get this letter, I know it's not especially touching. I love you, Jane Dryden.
That's beautiful. Your 11-year-old self never imagined you'd be reading that out loud in a museum someday, but here we are. I love this letter because we think in broad terms about the impact of the president's death. We see it downstairs reflected in the films and photographs, but a letter like this in your story demonstrates how, on a deeply personal level, this impacted people's lives. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Happy to.
Now, the reason that letter survives is because it was featured in a book a few years ago. Before we get to that, though, I want to show this response card. This is not the exact one you received, but you received one just like this. In fact,
I received four of these cards in one day's mail in April of '64.
No explanation for why 4 arrived on the same day. But you never actually got a personal response from Mrs.
No.
Kennedy.
Well, not factual.
But the book I mentioned that features the letter that you just read was published a few years ago. It's called Letters to Jackie. It was edited by a historian named Ellen Fitzpatrick. She contacted you about your letter. Tell us how that happened.
Oh my goodness, it was the weirdest thing. I was having a sort of sleepless night and got up at about 2 o'clock in the morning and went to my computer and checked Facebook. It's what you do in the middle of the night now. And I had an email from someone I didn't know that came, a message through Facebook that said, "Are you the Jane Dryden that role played with your friends Lorraine and Donna about the Kennedy assassination?" And I just went, what in the world? And the person contacting me was a copy editor at Harcourt Brace. And they said, "We're editing a collection of letters discovered at the Kennedy Library by this historian, Ellen Fitzpatrick. And we need your permission to be included in this book." So that was how that all came to life again. Oh my goodness, it was crazy.
Were you surprised that one of your letters had survived almost 50 years after the assassination?
Shocked.
People, this is a New York Times bestseller. This is, I assume people have contacted you about the letter that you wrote, Mrs. Kennedy. What do they typically ask you or say to you about your experience?
The weirdest thing was the day the book was published. Associated Press did a release story, and the first line of my letter, the part about "I bet you hate Texas, I do too," was the lead in the AP story. And this, around the world, including the lead newspaper in Tokyo and LA and the New York Times, and so I had friends from all over the place emailing me saying, "You go, what?" And then my phone rang all day from newspapers all over the country. I read the letter out loud on a CNN Sunday morning show. I was interviewed on a Spanish language news show. I mean, it was crazy. And so it was definitely my 15 minutes of fame, and today has made it into almost 20. It was so much fun to be able to relive that. But I promise you, if you want to be deeply moved, read this book.
It is actually available in our museum store if you'd like to pick up a copy while you're here today. So Jane, clearly you were very deeply impacted by this event. Have you found catharsis over the years, either through those letters back in '63, '64, or through the process of this book being published?
It's deepened my lifelong sort of longing for deep connection, and the work that I do in the world is about reaching out and helping people in times of crisis. And so when this all came out, people kept trying to connect those dots I have a seminary degree, I do pastoral care work, I'm in the emergency room with people, I do funerals, and I can't literally connect those dots, but this is part of a continuum, at least when I look back on it, that this is who I am.
We have to remember that schools at that time in 1963 didn't have counselors, as they did years later on September 11th, to kind of help kids process the trauma of such a global event such as the Kennedy assassination. So you were left, even without support from your family, to find your own outlet. And for you, it was the writing of more than 24 letters to Jackie Kennedy. Extraordinary. I want to end today's program with a strange and unique connection to a different part of the story. This is Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Your grandfather, who started the story today with his work during the 1960 campaign, Judge Kenneth Woodley, as you mentioned, was on the Court of Criminal Appeals in Austin. He was part of the panel that unanimously overturned the verdict in the Jack Ruby trial in 1966. They determined that the trial should not have been held in Dallas, and there was also accusations that the Dallas police had elicited an illegal confession from Ruby. And so he was going to have an all-new trial that was going to start in 1967, and Ruby died before that happened. But your grandfather was very much involved in that appeals process, and you knew nothing about it because you were off at boarding school at the time.
Right.
Yep. Were you surprised when you found out his connection to Jack Ruby?
Yes, I was horrified. I'd love to have that conversation with him. And, you know, when I look back on that, how that disconnect happened, because I heard myself telling you how integral he was to my experience of November 22nd and the days following, that when I left that elementary school and went to this boarding school, how, you know, irrevocably my life changed, and the people around me, and how I spent my time and who I spent it with, and I just became a different being. I had a different place in the world at that time. But I very much regret not being aware of that and not having had that conversation with him.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, this has been an extraordinary kind of journey through your interest in the Kennedys, your affection for them, and your grief following the assassination. Please join me in thanking Jane for being our guest today.